All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. We're going to go ahead and get started with today's session. Welcome to the EDFacts Modernization webinar. My name is Alec Walker. I support the Partner Support Center. I also have Courtney Montgomery from PSC on the line as well. We also have representatives from the Department of Education on the line who will be presenting today. We have Barb Tim, Chensu Chen, David Lee, Kelly Worthington, Liz Fenning, and Samantha Lewis. We also have two EDFacts coordinators that will be presenting slides today. We have Casey Alander from North Carolina and Yvette Johansson from Wisconsin. Before I do pass the presentation over, I would like to let everyone know that this session is being recorded and will be made available after today's presentation. If you would like to submit any questions or comments, please submit these via the Q&A panel in your session. Also, please note that participants will be muted upon entry. But you can, again, ask those questions in the Q&A panel. And you can also raise your hand during our question and answer sections. So I'll now be passing the presentation over to Kelly Worthington.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. As Alex said, I am Kelly Worthington. I'm responsible for overseeing the work of the EDFacts team within the department. Today, just to quickly go over the agenda, we've got some data governance remarks. I'm just going to explain why we're doing what we're doing and the way that we are doing it. You're going to hear an update on our modernization, and we're modernizing both process and systems. So you'll get to hear how we are changing the way that we are operating, as well as what's changing in the system itself. You'll get to hear a little bit of a summary, and I'm going to call it a celebration from the pilot effort that we did with the Common Core of Data. There were some really exciting results from this that I hope you're going to take away from that particular section, the benefits of what we're trying to accomplish here and what's going to happen after we get this fully implemented. We're going to hear from Liz, who's going to talk about the data notes and why that information is going to be changed. The way that we are doing data notes and the location of the data notes will be changing. This is all for school year 22-23, data about 22-23. We're going to hear from North Carolina and Wisconsin about their data governance processes, their data governance and data quality processes. And I'm so grateful that they agreed to come and participate. I've already seen a preview of what they're sharing, and I'm excited to for others to get to hear this. We'll have a brief word about common education data standards. We'll have time for questions, and then we'll do some final notes that are takeaway actions for you after the session ends. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide, Alec. This is a few words about data governance, and you can go to the next slide after that. We expanded the invitees today from what we would typically do from EDFacts coordinators or Common Core of Data coordinators, because one of the things that we heard from our data governance process is that we were not doing a great job on our process for ensuring full participation of the stakeholders who have a vested interest in our data process, in our data management. So part of that feedback was we needed to ensure everybody who has responsibility for data quality has access to the data quality results, that they have an opportunity to participate in that process. And you're going to be hearing how we are going to be expanding access in our new system and the management of data expectations that will be changing for school year 22-23. David's going to go over in just a few minutes that our end goal here is that when data are submitted to the U.S. Department of Ed, that those are ready to use. And right now we have months of delays between when we receive data and when we can actually use that data. So we'll talk about what we're doing and why we're doing it. There are a couple of just, a few tips for if you are new here. You may feel like you're stepping onto a bit of a moving train, and we'll do our best to explain what we're doing, not use too many acronyms. Please call us out if we are using too many, but we want to make sure that you walk away with a high-level understanding of what process we're going to be using for school year 22-23, both the data quality review process, the data submission and review upload and review process, correction of any data issues, how to explain data anomalies and what expectations are different, because the data notes that we have been receiving in many cases are not going to be acceptable in the future. So please listen closely to those examples. There are some who are doing a terrific job with the data notes and some who really need to listen close on what's going to be changing. We do recommend that if you're new, make sure you know who is submitting data to the U.S. Department of Ed. I'm not talking about the within state data submitters, the other staff or contractors that you've got working in your state offices submitting data. Know your due dates. If you're a subject matter expert, if you're in migrant, neglected, delinquent, IDEA, any of those programs, be sure you know your due dates, because there is one due date for the data. And we've had a lot of discussions about that we've had kind of rolling due dates, resubmission deadlines, all sorts of things that are used to refer to due dates. And we are trying to clean up that language to say there is only one due date, and it's when the data are first submitted, are due to the department. The other next steps, we'll be talking about them at the end of the session. If you are not new, all the same information still applies, but we just want to acknowledge that change is hard. We are going through changes ourselves within the department as we set up and practice these new processes and strategies. And there's a part of it that's just really not fun, but we are focusing on the benefits, and we hope that you will also see a really important improvement in your time and what you're spending your time on with the data management efforts. So we are excited about what we are seeing in the benefits, and we do believe we are solving some of the problems that we have had in recent years. But I just wanted to give you that preview of some of the things that are going to be happening, and I'm going to turn it over. Alec, you can go to the next slide. I'm going to turn it over to David Lee, who is on our team in the EDFacts office, and it's all yours, David.
Thank you, Kelly. Again, my name is David Lee. I'm part of Kelly's team on the EDFacts team, and I'm part of the team that's leading the effort on modernization. So I just wanted to spend some time giving you an update on modernization. For those of you who were with us back in June during our webinar, this should be a good refresher for you. So if you have any additional questions you want to ask, please note them definitely in the Q&A section. And for those of you who are new and have not joined us before, I'm hoping that you can get some good takeaways. We're going to walk through why we're modernizing, what we're modernizing, and then I will show you some draft screenshots of the new application that we are building. What I'd like to do is I will pause between sections to see if there are any questions. Alec, if you could kind of monitor the Q&A section, I will pause and ask you if there are any questions that we can try and answer as we go along. If there are any questions that we cannot answer immediately, we will definitely take those back and answer them at a later time. Next slide, please. So why are we modernizing? I think Kelly hit the nail on the head there when she said we are modernizing. Bottom line is to collect data that are usable at the due date. Next slide, please. So EDFacts modernization, there are two main reasons why we are modernizing. The first being for technical reasons. If you are aware, ESS, the EDFacts submission system, is almost 20 years old now. So with it being almost 20 years old, there are security requirements and technology that have caught up and surpassed us. So clearly, from a technical point of view, we do need to upgrade our application. But also, on the other hand, operationally, there are things that are currently not working and have not been working well. From an SCA point of view, data that we are seeing being collected at the due date are not usable, meaning that there's a lot of DQ work, data quality work that needs to be done on the data that we're collecting. And from an ed responsibility point of view, like I mentioned, there are a lot of post-submission data quality processes that are unsustainable and inefficient on our end while we're working with SCAs on data quality. So from an operational point of view, those are the reasons why we need to modernize. There are a handful of goals and priorities that we've set with modernization. First is to improve ED data review and use processes, as I've mentioned. We would like to provide tools to support the states in their processes, the processes that states will need to undoubtedly update and improve on within your state with the modernization. And then also we'd want to give states more ownership of the data quality process and data quality of the data that they are submitting. And also to collect high quality and usable data at the due date, and we want to ultimately eliminate resubmissions post due date. Next slide, please. So what exactly is changing? The main takeaway from what is changing is that we are going from a post-submission data quality process to a pre-submission data quality process. And I'll explain that in the next few slides. Also, I have a flow chart that will kind of explain how that's working. But that's the crux of what is changing. We're going from a post-submission to a pre-submission data quality process. Next slide, please. So if you are familiar with the current EDFacts cycle, it can be broken down to pretty much a 5-step process. The first step is that states will collect and submit their data by the due date to ESS. And then some of our business rules are applied during submission. Not all of our business rules are applied because of the limitations we have in our current system. So that's why when we get to step 3, when the data are pulled as of the due date, there is post-submission data quality review that is conducted on the ED side. The next step after that, the 4th step, is that the data quality results will be sent back to states, as you're aware, where states will review our feedback, and there will be some back and forth with data notes, comments, and ultimately step 5 is that states, they must resubmit their corrected data in response to the department's data quality findings. So that's the high-level 5-step current EDFacts cycle. Next slide, please. The new modernized EDFacts cycle will pare that down to about 3 steps. Step 1 being the business rules are now applied during pre-submission. And I'll explain that a little bit further when I get to some of the screenshots in the flowchart. But prior to submitting data to the department, the new application will allow states to apply business rules prior to submission. And then this next step would be that states will submit their data by the due date through our new application, which we are calling EDPass. And finally, step 3 being that data are usable once submitted. So because we're going from a post-submission to a pre-submission data quality process, the ultimate goal is that as of the due date, when data are submitted, the data are usable. And the ultimate goal is that no post-submission data quality review would be needed. Next slide, please. So what are some of the impacts to the states? First is that we're clearly reducing post-submission follow-up. So as I mentioned before, the goal is to eliminate post-submission follow-up, but I think we can all understand that that is not possible immediately. So our first goal is to reduce post-submission follow-up, and then our second goal is that states have control over the data quality process, and states are not dependent on ED staff availability or timeliness. I think, or timelines. I think in the past, there was a lot of back and forth where, depending on resources and the response that states were waiting on from ED would kind of extend the timeline of our data quality process. So because we are moving from post-submission to pre-submission data quality process, and we're giving states more control over the data quality process, the impact to states is that you will not be dependent on staff, ED, for responses or our timelines. From a state point of view, what does not change? States will continue to submit aggregated data by the due date to EDPAS, and states will retain control over when data are submitted to ED. So those two things will not change. However, what will change is that the due dates, as Kelly had mentioned, the due dates will be adjusted to allow for our new pre-submission process. So you can imagine, because now we're moving from a post-submission to a pre-submission data quality process, we anticipate that states will need to make updates to their internal processes, which will result in the need for some additional time in submitting your data. So the due dates will be adjusted accordingly with input from states and program offices. Another change, as I mentioned, and I think I've repeated multiple times, is that business rules are applied prior to data submission. SCAs still will submit their final data by the due date, and ED will receive usable data as of the due date. So those are some things that will change. I'm going to pause here to see if there are any questions about what I've presented in the past few slides.
So David, I have, it looks like 3 questions in the Q&A panel right now, so we'll just start from the top. First question is from Seth. When I think of data modernization, I think of data systems that are more accommodating to dynamic changes, not static collections that cannot change. While only having one due date may simplify schedules, it will diminish data quality. So how is this change modern?
David, I can take that question if you'd like.
Sure.
I think Sean is pointing out what's probably an ideal state, but it also doesn't recognize that what we are collecting are data in response that is an accountability for sending out grant funds. So the grant making process requires an annual review of data. It requires an annual response with very specific, data as of this due date, for example, or data as of this time frame. There are a lot of requirements that go around those grants that are funded by the department and flow to the states. When the state submits an application back to the department, they're saying, yes, I will meet all of those reporting requirements. I will have data that is high quality. It will represent who's participating in this program, how they're doing. Within that, the state also has the responsibility for ensuring the internal controls around their data so that they can give those answers on time to the department. So I think I don't disagree with there are different ways that you can look at data modernization, but the nature of the data that we are collecting and the way that those data have to be used by both the grant making office, by us when we are under audit investigation, which happens all throughout every single year. And if you're not aware of those, some of the examples are just going to the GAO, the Government Accountability Office website. I believe you can see all the reports about their examination of data that you're submitting to us. We have to be able to provide a snapshot view of what happened in a 1-year period of time based on this grant reporting requirement. So there's a lot of reasons that go with that, and a lot of things that we are doing to adjust to make sure that you've got the business rules ahead of time. You've got a tool to be able to check the data. You've got a broad range of stakeholders that are participating in the data quality process. So we don't expect to see any diminishing of the data quality with the new process. And we certainly have not seen that with our CCD pilot. But the point is well taken, and I hope that helps provide some context around that. And then David, there are 3 questions about the due dates. When will we know about the adjusted due dates? And do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I can answer the next few. When will we know about adjusted due dates? And I think there's another one saying, will we have any say in the adjusted due dates? To answer that question, the due dates are currently being reviewed by the program offices based on when data are needed. So that will be, the adjusted due dates will be published as soon as possible. So you guys can, so the states will have as much notice, advance notice, as possible. But in terms of when will we have say in the adjusted due dates, I believe there's a way states are able to provide their input on due dates. And I'm going to have to circle back with PSC to see how we are collecting that information. And I will ask them to include that in the notes that we publish, the Q&A notes that we publish after the webinar. Kelly, do you have something to add?
I was gonna say, I got a follow-up question about will you be taking state feedback about the reasonable due dates? Part of those due dates are based on when the federal office has to be able to use the data according to what they're responsible for, whether it's to Congress and their annual reports, whether it's to be able to fund their next year grants. They have to have information in a certain period of time. So we've been working with our data stewards within the department, and those data stewards are responsible for implementing those grant programs to find out what is the last possible date that you need to have final information so that we can give the states as much time as possible in submitting the data. So one of the things that we did, I think it was last year and a half ago, kind of losing track of time here, but we went to the NCES forum that's got representatives from states and district offices to ask about what are the most important things to you when we are going to be implementing this modernization. And one of the top things was, we need you to give us more time if you're going to expect basically a higher standard of what's being submitted at that due date. So I don't know if we have mentioned it before, but the due dates that are moving to a later point in time. So hopefully that was clear. We've already said that. So I believe, I'm trying to think if there's anything that did not, that was coming earlier. So if that's incorrect, we'll get that. I apologize, but our goal was to give you more time. So yes, we are seeking state feedback. The end of the day, the ed program office that needs to be able to use the data gets to say when that data use need, what that date is.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. There's another question here about, will data notes also need to be submitted by the due date then? The answer to that is yes. Ideally, when I go through some of these screenshots in the flow chart, you'll see when data notes will be required. Because we're going to a pre-submission data quality process, as the states are going through the data quality process, you will have the opportunity to provide data notes for the business rules that do trigger. And I'll show a little bit more of that in the next few screenshots. How will questions regarding year-over-year changes be incorporated? I think this has to do with year-to-year edits, if I'm not mistaken. Those are still being discussed from a year one launch point of view. There may be a little bit delay in rolling out year-to-year edits because of the fact that year one we'd have to load prior year data and things like that. But ideally, from a long-term point of view, year-over-year changes will be incorporated in EdPass along with the data notes that have been entered in prior years. Let me see if I've missed anything else. There's a question from KN Lewis. Is this extended deadline just for 22-23 or beyond? The goal here is that due dates would change beginning in 22-23 and beyond. So I think to answer your question, this is not a temporary due date change. Of course, things may change in the future. Obviously, I can't foresee what's any other policy issues or changes regarding that. But the goal here is for the due date to change beginning in 22-23 and beyond. Alec, is there anything else that I've missed here? I think I've gotten all the questions.
No, it looks like you've covered everything.
Okay. All right, if there aren't any questions, then I will move on to the next slide, please. How will the new application work? Improved efficiency and streamlined process. Next slide, please. What I've done here is we've provided, Alec, next slide, please. Thank you. What I've done here is provided sort of a very simplified visual of our new process. I know that there are a lot of words and a lot of things that are being thrown around, but I just wanted to show you a quick simplified visual will kind of give you an understanding of how the new modernized application will work. So if you look in the orange box to the left, SCAs will collect data required to submit. This is our ICR process or the OMB package that we receive approval. And so SCAs will collect data required by the OMB package to submit. Then the SCAs will upload their data files. Once data files are uploaded, the file error processing will begin. This is similar to the current ESS system, but in the new EDPass application, file error processing is a complete set of business rules, not a partial set as we have currently. So once the uploaded data have gone through file error processing, there will be some corrections or re-uploads or data notes, things like that, that will need to be entered, and then a state will re-upload their file with corrected data if needed. So again, once that data quality process will go through, data quality results will come out, and data notes are provided. So if you look at kind of like the first 2.5 columns, that's where the states will upload all of their data and go through the pre-submission data quality process. And the data notes, any data notes will be attached to data quality results. So to answer the question that was asked about data notes, this is where the data note that in the current way we've done in EDFacts, the data notes usually come post-submission in our post-submission data quality process. But our new process, because it's pre-submission, the data notes would be required prior to submission. Once everything has checked out in terms of the data quality results, data notes that are required are submitted or entered, then your data and data files are marked as ready to submit, and the states can submit their data. Now, this process here that you're seeing in the blue box is the flow. That can happen as many times as needed prior to the due date in that green box there. So once you submit data, as long as it's prior to the due date, you can go back and check to see if you need to update your data or correct your data somehow. All of that can still happen prior to the due date. And with our new process, because everything is pre-submission, once the due date comes, we have usable data to the right of the due date. Any questions about this flowchart here?
We do have a couple in the Q&A panel, David. So first is from Michelle. If we have to submit data that had not been finalized internally, will there be a process for being able to resubmit and update the data?
Yes. So I think my explanation I'm assuming that you were typing as I was explaining this, but one of the key distinctions that we're making in our new EDPass application is the term submission and upload. So in the past, currently in ESS, once you upload a file into ESS, we call that a submission. Now, what we're doing with the new process is that we're calling that an upload. Everything that you've uploaded into EDPass is still within the state's control, meaning those are not considered ed data. You must submit your data in order it to be considered for acceptance by the state, by the department. So to answer your question directly, yes, you will be able to resubmit and upload data as many times as you need to, as long as it's prior to the due date.
Thank you. And moving on, it looks like we have a couple other as well. You want to tackle these now?
Yeah, I'll just look at those. So June is asking, a file re-upload may not be required. This implies that the file will need resubmission. It may just require data notes because the data are correct. Yes, that's correct. If a file re-upload is not required, then yes, you would go from upload file to data quality process to data note directly to submit. There would not be a required step of re-upload file. Liberty asks, how will submitters know if their data notes are acceptable? I'm gonna kind of defer that to Liz's section when she talks about data notes, but we will, and Liz will touch on this, but there is ample opportunity for training resources that are related to data notes that states can access and take advantage of in terms of what type of data notes and what information needs to be included in data notes to be acceptable to the department. There's a question from Seth here. When will we get to see EdPass? I've heard a lot of, sorry, it's moving. I've heard a lot of promises about what it will do, but seeing it do it has been noticeably absent, which makes me nervous. I will share some screenshots, some mock-up draft screenshots here today. There were some that we shared back in June as well. I believe these presentations are accessible to the participants. So if you want to go back and look at those, that's fine. One thing I'd like to kind of plug here is that we will have a UAT, a user acceptance testing window that we will solicit states to participate in. So if you really have a strong desire to actually get into the application and help out with some testing, we will select some states and some participants to take part in that. So please watch out for those announcements. Robin asks, will the process be similar to states that submit via EMAPS IDA Part C? So that's another topic that we will cover today. Some of the metadata. So our ultimate goal is to include all the metadata surveys within EdPass. We will not be able to do the entirety of them year one, but we will incorporate some of the surveys into EdPass with the ultimate goal of moving everything into EdPass. And we'll touch on that a little later in this presentation. Joseph asks, what if we do not have a submission filed by the due date? Currently, we have the option for a late submission. Will this still be an option in the new process?
David, can I answer that one real quick here? Will there be an option for resubmission, late submission? The answer is you will have an opportunity to correct something that was not correct, which whether it's final, whether it was not in at all at the due date. So it's going to be considered a correction. It's going to be considered something that you will have to explain to the program office, the grant making office. Why didn't you have the data final and ready at the due date when it was when it needed to be submitted? So there's going to be a new process for requesting a submission that is a correction after the due date, but there will be an opportunity, but it is going to be a new process and probably new accountability with that. And David, I'm going to make a suggestion that we're getting a lot of questions here, very good questions, but we have a lot of presenters still to go, and I'm wondering if we could continue to receive the questions and then answer them at the end. Would that be okay with you?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Okay, and we're also going to be writing up responses to questions and posting those when as PSC posts the webinar. So you'll get both the verbal answer here, and if we don't get to something, you'll get the written answer when we post things.
And I apologize to my fellow presenters that I did not realize that I'm taking a little bit too much time here. So let's move on. Next slide, please. So the key differences, kind of to recap here, some key differences that you'll notice is required action of uploading the data before the due date. I think I had mentioned that, uploading the files, addressing any data quality errors, and then submitting the data by the due date. One thing that did not come up in the questions, or I did not mention, is that the new system, the new application, EdPass, will include the state submission plan. I think we did give a screenshot of that back in June, if my memory serves me correctly. So if you want to take a look at that presentation, that should be included there. For business rules that fail, either correct the data or add a data note. I think we've already touched that as well. All business rules must be addressed before submitting the data. Again, a pre-submission data quality process. Data notes can be applied to multiple errors. This is something that I will touch in the next few screenshots as well, where you can apply a data note to multiple errors. You don't have to re-enter the data note at each time. And then finally, EDFacts coordinators will be able to set up users within their states. This has to do with management of the rules within EDPAS. The EDFacts coordinators will be given the ability to create users within their states. Okay, next slide. So I think these are the next handful of slides that everyone has been anticipating. We're going to do a kind of a quick sneak peek at the mockups. One thing to note is that these screens are still under development. These are drafts only. They're mockups. They are temporary. They're not final. So although they will look most likely the way you see and function the way I'm describing them, there are changes that could be made. Next slide, please. The first draft that the image that we've included here is the login to EDPAS and what we're calling the landing page. So once you log in, there will be resources with links to certain documents or websites that you can access, along with a navigation bar at the top. And I don't know if you can see that well, but there are a few different pages or links that you can navigate to in that navigation bar. Okay, so the first place I'm going to show you is the link that says file list in that navigation bar. If you go to the next slide. The file list page, what we are calling the go-to place, if you will, is the place where you're going to see all the files that need to be submitted, along with the education levels and their status. So for example, if you look at the immigrant file in row 1, you'll see the due date, the school year, the file number, file name, and then from each education unit level, what has been submitted, what has yet to be collected, what is not required, or if there are any errors. So you'll get a simple kind of summary of every single file that you're required to submit. On the right side, you'll see the red circle. That's to highlight the kebab menu, what we call the kebab menu on this page. That will give you some access to additional options. Next slide. If you go to the next slide, it looks like the slide was cut off here a little bit, but if you look on the very right, you'll see the option for that says DQ results, SSP updates, submit data, delete data, and download data. So there are a handful of functions from that kebab menu that if you hover over, that you will be able to access various pages and do different functions. So right now, if you see the red highlight, the red square on the right side of this screenshot, you'll see that is actually highlighting delete data. And so you'll be able to, one of the new functions within EDPAS is that the states will be able to go in and delete data that have yet to be submitted to the state. Okay, so I'm going to show you a quick delete data function. If you go to the kebab for a file that you've selected, and you click on the delete data, which is in the red box that is cut off, you'll get to the next slide. And this will give you the delete data pop-up. So you'll see the school year, the file spec number, and the name, and the due date. And then you will be able to go in and delete different levels of data and education units. So in this case, the sample here is that you've clicked LEA level, and then you can click on the LEA ID of whichever LEA that you want to delete from your data. Okay, next slide. Once you've done that, you will be asked to confirm your delete. And you can see here it says this action cannot be undone. So another sample of delete data function, and then you will go ahead and delete your data. Okay, next slide. Going back to the file list page, like I mentioned, the kebab menu on the right. The next example that I want to show you is download data, which is in the cut off red box there. There's a download data option where you can actually download the data that you've uploaded or submitted, and you can view that as well. So if you go to the hover over the kebab menu and you select download data, that will take you to the next page, which is our download data pop-up. And here you can choose at which levels you want to download, and also the version, meaning in progress, meaning it hasn't been submitted. It's only been uploaded to EdPass, not submitted to the department, or data that have already been submitted that you'd like to download and view. Now, please keep in mind that when you download data, it will download in CSV format. And if you have multiple files, they will be zipped and you can save them to your local drive. Okay, next slide. I think one of the other areas that folks are interested in is the data quality results list. Just want to give you a few screenshots of that. When you get to the data quality results, as I mentioned in pre-submission, you will get your rule ID error message and then the data group and number of unresolved or resolved issues. So for example, here you can see there are 3 rules that triggered, and then there are various data groups and the number of errors that have triggered. Once you get to the data quality results list, you can also view the details of each list. So if you go to the next slide, if you click on one of those view detail buttons, you'll be able to go to that specific error and view all the instances of that error. So in this case, you have multiple LEAs and schools that have triggered because of the error. And here is where you're going to add your data note. As we had mentioned before, you can actually select, so on the left checkbox, you can select which errors or which LEA and schools that you want to enter a data note for, and you can add a data note at the bottom, add new data note. So basically, in this case, you are going to add a data note for the 3 schools that you've selected in this error list. Next slide, please. And if you do that, you'll get the data note pop-up, which will allow you to enter a data note for those schools. So in this case, this error triggered because the word charter was in their school name. However, they are not identified as a charter school. So the state went in and said, we have charter in our school name, but that's an approved name, even though these are not charter schools. And then they would save that data note. Okay, those are the slides I wanted to share. I know I kind of blew through those because of lack of time, and I apologize for that. If there are any questions about the screenshots or the functionality, please enter them in the Q&A. I will go through them after the webinar and answer those to my best ability. And I will now turn it over to Chen Su to cover the CCD pilot.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Chen-Su Chen. I'm the Survey Director for Chemical Data, non-physical. For those of you who are not familiar with CCD, CCD was chosen to pilot the EDFacts modernization model because we have a system that can be used to test the data quality review process that we envision for the modernization efforts. So the system is called Data Management System, DMS. It's an online data processing system. So data load into the system, and the system generates error reports based on the built-in business rules. States can review, respond to the error reports. If the error are a result of incorrect data, state can resubmit data and make the errors go away. And if the state decides the data are correct, they will just submit data notes, and we will release the data notes along with the final data files. So in the past, meaning before school year 21-22 data collection, our data review process just like David just described it. It's we don't do our data quality review until the due date. So after the due date, our team went into DMS, pull all the read all the data notes and review the data quality, and then summarize all the data, the remaining data issues haven't been resolved in DMS. And then for each single state, and we write a nice email to the state and reach out every single state with the report. And you can imagine this take a lot of time and efforts. And start there, we start our weeks or sometimes month of data follow up with states, back and forth. And then we finalize the data file and then release the data. And I think some of the CCD coordinators probably still remember those brutal summers. You spend weeks digging into membership data, lunch data, staffing data you submitted a month ago that you don't even remember what happened. This year, we changed the process. So we wanted states to go into DMS and review the error reports, respond to the errors, and resolve the data issues. And we are here to provide systems. Next slide. So we broke the pilot into 3 phases. The first phase is for directory grades offer. The second is for CCD school membership lunch data. And then the last one is staffing data, and then finish up everything. For phase 1, I have to be honest that I was really nervous and the team was very nervous. So we were kind of biting our nails, and we were pretty aggressive in terms of chasing after states for data submission and resolving the data issues. We log into the system, and if we see state hasn't submitted data, we kind of getting nervous. 2 weeks before we close out phase 1, we reach out to the states that hadn't submitted data or hadn't addressed their errors. And so the last 2 weeks quite busy. But I think we finished up pretty well. And then when we finish phase 1, we feel like, well, if we really want to mimic the process we envision, then we kind of need to let states do their own thing, not bugging them as much. So we starting phase 2, we sit back and we still monitoring the progress in DMS, and we start offering the office hours weekly for states to come to ask questions. Can be a very general question or specific, the errors they are seeing in DMS. And then phase 3, we do the same thing. Next slide. So I would say overall, the result is very encouraging. We do have good quality data, useful data at due date. We try to quantify the results here. So you can see, I would say for each phase, about half states, they don't need our help at all, either little or no help. And we log into DMS, their errors are cleared. Either no errors or all the errors are addressed by good data notes. Phase 1, we did have 2 states missing the due date, and they were not able to make it to our release files. However, we didn't, for the states make on the release files, there's no corrections. So we were able to use it as of due date to release our preliminary directory and grades offer files. and it's 2.5 months after the due date. And the phase 2, we still have a few states missing a due date, and we have to work with 2 states to get the corrected data after the due date. Phase 3, because we are finished up everything, we need to have a very clean. We are not calling them preliminary anymore. This is the final file. So we have to put in more effort to analyze the data and review the files. So we are having 7 states, they had to correct their data after the due date. However, those are mostly due to the ad hoc analysis outside DMS. DMS, I forgot to mention that DMS is more individual, like checking individual entities. But we have to sometimes check the year-to-year aggregate data, and DMS was not designed for that. So for those analysis, we had to ask state to conduct the ad hoc analysis outside DMS on their own, and then provide data notes if there are errors flagged. And we are hoping, it's our hope to release the final file before the end of the calendar year, which would be make it 5-6 months after the due date. That it's much shorter than prior year release. Usually takes a month or longer. Next slide. So, like I said, overall results is very encouraging, but we do learn something from the pilot. We are seeing the data notes in the state submission plan and DMS are much better and improved from prior years. However, we do see a few states still submitting data notes saying data are correct or data this is what we received from LES without any detailed explanation, especially for 5-year edits. We typically don't go back to states question the data notes. When we see insufficient data notes, we just suppress. And this year we do have 1 state that have a higher suppression rate. And we look into the data quality and it turns out the data really was not correct. And we had to work with the state to get it correct. So that's something that's why we really want to emphasize how to provide good data notes and really pay attention to error reports. We are also doing the pilot. We are seeing the established data governance in some states. We are seeing collaboration between programs within states to resolve data, say like lunch data or staffing data. And one of the big things, like I mentioned, ad hoc analysis that's outside DMS requires some extra work, follow up with states. So that's something we really try to find a way to help states to get that done correctly. Next one. So when I mentioned office hours, we have some states come to office hours and they told us that they are very helpful. In the office hours, we just, when they have specific questions in DMS, we just we log in DMS and share a screen and we resolve the issues or we tell the states what action they need to take to make the error go away. And sometimes they also will ask, what kind of notes would be sufficient? If I say this, would that be acceptable? And so things can be resolved there. But we still have many states that don't come to our office hour and their data are not as good. So we just want to know what can we do to make it better. and can attract more states to come to those office hours to seek help. And what can we do better in our future webinars? What do you want us to include? And lastly, the ad hoc analysis, unfortunately, with the new system, we try to build in as many business rules in the system, but those ad hoc analysis still, it's not making in. So we still rely on states to do the ad hoc analysis for 22-23. So let us know how we can help to make it work for you. And feel free to send your feedback to PSC after the webinar. We would love to hear from you. Next, I think it's turning to Liz. Is that?
That's me. Let me see. Okay. You can go to the next slide, Alec. We're going to talk about the important information of data notes. So what is expected of this section of the presentation? After this presentation, participants will have a better understanding of the purpose of a data note, the information that needs to be provided in a data note, and the process for submitting a data note. We'll also go over the resources available for writing a good data note, and we'll look at an example of a data note. Next slide. Why provide a data note? We provide data notes to explain data that are submitted. Data are used by the department as well as other data users for a variety of reasons. The submitted data should not leave unanswered questions, and if it does, that's where a data note comes into play. For example, if you're submitting data that have substantial changes from the previous year, submit a data note explaining those changes. Were the changes in the data due to state policy change, new implementation policy, data collection issue? This way, when the program offices review the data, they have an explanation as to why the data are submitted as is. Anticipate questions that you think the program office might ask your state to elaborate on and provide that in a data note. Too much information is better than no information. If someone in your office has asked a question regarding your data, chances are someone else might have the same question. The goal is to have usable data at the due date. Data notes are used within the department as well as in public documentation. Next slide. What information should be provided in a data note? Provide reasons for data anomalies. This is such an important step. Affirming the data are correct as reported does not address why the data anomaly exists. A thorough explanation as to why the data are correct as reported is needed. The best data note does not leave any unanswered questions and does not create additional questions. An example of a thorough data note will be provided a little later in the presentation. A thorough data note will provide relevant information on any changes that have affected the data. For example, in measurements, collection, subgroup identification, population counts, and definitions. Next slide. Nope, sorry. Can you go back one? Thank you. Speak to policy change. If state policy has changed the way data are defined, measured, and or collected, provide specific examples in the policy in which the policy change impacts the data submitted. Note implementation changes that could affect data. If changes in your state's implementation of programs or services could have impacted the data that are reported, offer the way these changes impacted the data. The data notes provide explanations of substantial changes and other changes that data users may find notable or of interest in the data from previous years. Comment on next steps. If the SCA has already identified a potential data anomaly, describe the next steps the state plan to take to resolve the issue in future data submissions. Provide this in addition to the reason the data quality issue occurred. Next slide. So here's an example of a data note. So the data concern in file spec 175, the total number of students who took the regular assessment with accommodations and received a valid score in school year 2018-19 is significantly smaller than the number reported in school year 19-20. And if you go to the next slide, I have a chart with the example of the data note, the usable data note, better and best, and we're going to go through each one in the next couple slides. So next slide. The unusable data note. The data match the state records. This data note is not usable because it does not explain why the anomaly occurred and how the state plans to address the anomaly going forward. If a data user were to read this note, it would leave them with unanswered questions. Next slide. And this is a better data note, but still not exactly what we're looking for. We are reworking the system to report accommodations. This caused the difference in the accounts. The better data note still leaves some unanswered questions. The data note says what happened, but does not provide information on how or when the data will be corrected. So we really need a little bit more explanation and in-depth explanation. Next slide. Which is the best data note and provides a complete explanation. The state identified problems with reporting accommodations for school year 2018-19. The state reported only accommodations for paper-based assessment. For school year 2019-20, the state was able to also report accommodations for computer-based tests. This explains the details of the problem with the reporting of accommodations. So this is what the department is looking for. Next slide. Process for submitting a data note. So we have several ways to submit a data note. For school year 21-22, we are still you can submit your note through the Partner Support Center. They can escalate the data note to us, and we can get program office response as to whether they need more information. You can also submit your data note through the state submission plan, also known as the SSP. CCD data management system, DMS, has a comment field. For IDA users, OMB Max. The Consolidated State Performance Report, CSPR. And for those using EMAPS, you can also upload put your data note into EMAPS for EMAPS collections. For school year 22-23, we did go through a little bit of talking about uploading the data notes. All data notes will be entered into EDPass, which will be helpful. Less burden on states. We'll still have the SSP function that will be in EDPass. So you'll be able to do file specification level notes in EDPass. Also responses to specific business rule failures. So when a business rule triggers as the pre-submission, you'll be able to add a data note for that. Again, we're still working out the logistics of how we're going to look at those data notes, whether it be office hours or reviewing the data notes with the program offices, but as soon as we have more information on that, we'll provide it to you. And now I think I'm turning it over to Barb, or nope, still got to go through the resources. Sorry. So resources available. You can always contact the Partner Support Center. They're always there to help. Most of you have their contact information, and if not, we'll get that to you. These next two bullets will have links in them when you review the slides once they're turned over to the states. You can look at the fact sheet created by AM with the assistance of Ed. That is also in the process of being updated. So look for an updated fact sheet in the next coming months. And then the IDA Data Center also did a really good presentation on Back to Basics. So that'll also include the link. And now I'm turning it over to Barb. Nope. North Carolina.
Hi guys, Casey Lander here from the Department of Public Instruction in North Carolina. And I have been asked to talk to you guys a little bit about how North Carolina manages to be a superstar in EDFacts submissions, which might not exactly be the way they worded it. Next slide, please. So our process for EDFacts reporting goes back a bit. As you can see, we started with a data management group back in 2008 because there was a recognition of pretty siloed work going on in the department, and with business areas not recognizing needs outside of their own silos. And when North Carolina talks about business areas, it loosely translates to the USCD's definition of a program office, but not every area that supplies data to North Carolina is actually a program office. So we use the more inclusive business area to include all the areas of the agency that are responsible for sending data to EDFacts from their areas. So what we were trying to do with the advent of the DMG was to make a general recognition throughout the agency of everyone's needs, not just individual business areas. And there were plenty of disparate collections, 20 different systems were in place and separate from our SIS. So we had a lot of work to do, but it did help us recognize areas that are authoritative for data. So the exceptional children area wasn't being reported out by the Migrant Education Office. So we were recognizing that EC should be authoritative for exceptional children data. Migrant education should be authoritative for all things migrant. The DMG helped with that. And we also put in place some pretty effective data management standards and procedures that everyone followed or was expected to follow. Next slide, please. So what that DMG development did for us was it brought everybody together in the beginning every week or every other week as needs arose, so that we could talk about the data delivery schedule, the impacts of, for instance, one of the primary examples we use is discipline and dropout data wasn't being delivered to our student information warehouse until sometime in February. And it was very quickly figured out as we were meeting that the exceptional children area was really struggling with that because they needed to have those data available to them for their data requirements by December. So it was a pretty easy fix for between those two business areas to figure out how they could better align with other areas that needed their data. The open forum for conversation in these meetings was pretty extraordinary for the agency. I actually was a business area before I was a EDFacts coordinator. And I was really amazed at the camaraderie that we built, and that once everybody understood that everybody had requirements and not really anyone superseded anyone else's, it made it really easy to understand that the priority was the agency priority, and also to get an understanding of who the key players in different areas, business areas or program offices were in the agency. So very few people on the DMG could not tell you right now who was the go-to person for migrant, who is the go-to person for exceptional children, who's the go-to person for Title III, because of these meetings. And those meetings still happen. Our cadence now is about twice a month, but we don't, and I'm the actual coordinator of those meetings, but we don't meet if there's not a need, and we can also communicate through email if the need is greater than the cadence of the meetings. I would say, having been on that board first as a business owner and now as the coordinator, that the most important impact for North Carolina was the opportunity to build these relationships and understand that we were all working towards solid data across the board and not specifically to one program office. So it gave us a much better global view than we had before. Yeah, so we're all those of us who are on the board and have been on the DMG for years are very loud and proud about the progress that it allowed us to make. Next slide, please. Okay, so then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the EDFacts submission process as it exists right now, and perhaps how that will help inform what it's going to look like when it goes from EDFacts to EDPass. And as I do that, I want to be very open and transparent that not only will, North Carolina, as all the other states, be going to the new submission process, but North Carolina will also be led by a new team. Our new EDFacts coordinator, Tara Dominguez, and her functional analyst, Eric Marshall, will be taking the roles from myself and Robin Lucarelli, who retired in the spring. So, and Tara, many of you know Tara's name. Tara is very well known on the federal stage. She's got a stellar reputation as a Office of Civil Rights data manager and has done a spectacular job in that role. And I have no doubt she'll be equally valuable in this role. And I will sit back in my EDFacts emeritus status and just be available for questions. So, but I wanted to make sure I noted that before we go into the current process. So the overarching, I think, success in North Carolina is part one, because we have a statewide SIS. So that makes our job, if it can ever be easier, a little bit easier, because most, if not all, of the data resides in one location. Now, getting it to that location can be a little tricky, but once it's there, it is there. And we rely very heavily on the business data owners, AKA program offices, to get the data. We give them a schedule well in advance of due dates that they know their data is due, so that it can be input into our Cedars data warehouse. And then the functional analyst will be able to access the data to build the specs, which then the EDFacts coordinator submits to the state. That is done almost 100% through email communication. Occasionally there are meetings needed if there's a new business owner in town that needs to learn the ropes. But usually we just have a regular communication, pretty constant. We forward most of the information that comes from USCD, partner support, to the appropriate business areas, so they're aware of submission schedules, changes to any collections. And if they miss those, when we send them the reminder that their data is due on X date, which is typically about 8 weeks prior to the data being due to USCD, we include the spec. And we've done the work, we being the EDFacts team, up front to let those business areas know of any changes. I will say the program offices do an excellent job. The federal program offices also do a pretty solid job of letting their program offices know of any changes coming up in submissions. We really have a very high expectation that our business owners will be involved every step of the way. When we send the due dates with the data that is needed, we also send the prior year data for them to, once we create the data, we not only send them that data to review prior to submitting it, but we also include prior year submission so they can compare it. And then that's when I capture, or the EDFacts coordinator captures any feedback and uses that for our data notes that we will either put in ahead of time or that we save in a file for when we get questions from USCG. And we don't submit until we get that feedback, till we get sign off from the business area. And that's when the final submission is done. So next slide, please. So knowing that change is never easy, it won't be easy in North Carolina, even though I feel like we're well positioned with our current process to bring our business owners in on the forefront and hear from them and get them intimately involved. I know transitions are never easy, and we'll be transitioning not only to a new process, but also obviously it will be early in the career of the new team. But we do believe that this current structure of cross-agency communication and partnership will ensure the transition to EdPass will be as easy as possible, recognizing again that, you know, there will be bumps along the way. But because our data owners are already currently involved in the process, we think it'll be a bit of an easier transition. I am personally thrilled that they'll be involved in a more formal way, that they will not only be asked to participate, but they will be given passwords and you know, access to the system. I have some questions about what that's going to look like as far as how much access will they have, and how much more coordination will that take between the business owners and the FX coordinator. But that's a question for another day, I think. And I am very, very convinced that giving them access to the system and the ability to look in to see what's happening may be more of a buy-in to better quality data. And we won't need quite as many notes or quite as much back and forth, which we have tried very hard in North Carolina to do that on the front end selfishly, so I don't have so much work to do in the spring and summer. But I think that's it for me. I think the next slide is just to see if anybody has any questions. And I think we've decided we're going to hold those to the end. But if anybody does have a burning something they need to ask, feel free. And I think I'm going to turn it over to Yvette from Wisconsin.
Yeah, I just wanted to say if there was a burning question, we'll go ahead and put that in the chat. I'm happy to give you a little bit of time here, Casey. I just was afraid we were going to shortchange you on time. So
no, I totally understand that. I hope I tried to go as swiftly as possible. It's usually not a problem for me. Loud and fast.
You did great, and I think you provided so many strategies there that actually I think we'll be able to use when we're answering some of the questions that we do have in the chat now. So thank you for sharing those. Barb was sending me a few of her favorite quotes from what you were saying, so we'll get those in an important document.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you all for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and I don't see any questions for you, so I think we'll go ahead and we will go ahead and move on to Yvette.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, good afternoon, good morning, maybe to some people. I'll get started and get into our slides. So I have a bit of I'll just introduce myself as well. So I'm the director of the Data Warehouse and Decision Support team here at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction. And so I am still the EDFacts coordinator currently, but we are also hiring for my replacement as that role. So we're in kind of a transition phase here at the department as well. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So Wisconsin overview, we have around 829,000 public school students, just to give you kind of an idea of the size of our state. So that's about 2,100, almost 2,200 public schools, and then about 421 public school districts with also 35 independent charter school LAs, which those they can close and open a little bit more frequently than our public school districts. So that's always one of our focus points as we move into data quality as well. Go ahead, next slide. So LEA data quality outreach. So we, and this is more the process that we go through before we take our statewide data snapshot every year. So that currently happens in early December, and that's taking our snapshot for year-end topics from the prior school year. So right now, you know, that's looking at 21-22, and then also taking the snapshot for the current year fall enrollment for 22-23, both all students, and then for the child count for students with IEPs as well. So right in this kind of time period, we're starting to meet with our internal program areas to plan out our communication strategies and outreach strategies with our LEAs, our local education agencies, to focus on either problem areas that we have noticed from prior years or any new collections that we're starting. And again, like I mentioned, this includes our communication strategy. So we have several different ways that we reach out to our LEAs. We can also obviously send them emails, but sometimes, you know, you get too many emails and you start to tune those out. So in the past few years, we have also built a data alert process in our data quality portal called the WISE Data Portal. And we use the WISE acronym for Wisconsin Information System for Education. We put WISE in front of everything. So WISE Data is the portal where LEAs go to review their validation messages, errors, and warnings, and also where they can view those data quality alerts, which are only issued once or twice before the snapshot. And so those alerts are more looking kind of at year-over-year types of data to say, hey, we think this might look a bit odd, please go have a look, kind of a thing. So that's where we use those alerts for. Sometimes if the issues that the internal program areas found are smaller in nature, there may be phone calls or emails involved as well. So we work very closely with the internal program areas, my team, the data warehouse team, then also our customer services team, which really leads that outreach process as well. And then in addition to that, we also offer weekly user group calls, kind of similar to what Chen Su was mentioning with the CCD outreach. We also offer weekly calls where we give updates to on process improvements we've made back to the LEAs, but then they can also ask questions of us that are mostly answered during the call. Sometimes we have to follow up, but they're mostly answered during that call. So then, just looking over my notes here, I would mention too that for kind of determining who we're talking with in our internal program areas, we do have a data context inventory that we keep up to date that kind of goes over all the different topics that we have throughout the agency. Some are obviously reported in EDFacts, some are not, and we kind of note if there's also an EDFacts person that we work with specifically for a specific area, especially for our bigger collections like in Title I and accountability assessment areas. We have a specific person for those areas. But in addition to that, then we also have monthly WISE steering committees where we meet with most of the directors throughout the agency to talk about both ongoing projects and enhancements that we have going on, but also confidential data requests that are coming in that they vet. And then that also acts, just as a general avenue for two-way communication between our IT teams, data warehouse, and for discussing data quality generally as well. And then, like I said, once we get a bit closer to that December timeframe and kind of the November, late October, early November period, that's where we're reaching out to our LEAs more heavily as we work into that. And then we also have a tool that we use internally, built through a Power BI report to kind of track the kind of aggregate high level information about the different topics that we're collecting. Like we can track how many LEAs haven't submitted anything, so that they have 0 submissions, or if there was the number of LEAs that have large notable changes over the years too. So we also have that internal report for ourselves and also for our directors throughout the agency to have an insight in how we're going towards that that snapshot date as well. So next slide, please. So I'll kind of talk about our current EDFacts process. So usually we meet with each of the program areas again in the break between reporting seasons. So usually over the summer, again with the transitions that we've been going through recently, I haven't had as much of a chance to do that, but I hope to do that soon with our program areas. But typically we meet with our program areas over the summer to talk about both EDFacts and CSPR reporting, both to talk about changes that might have happened internally for how we need to report the data, and then also obviously if the file specs have changed from the federal side as well. And then in addition to that, we also create even more detailed timelines for those larger program areas that I mentioned, like accountability, and assessment teams and the Title I teams, just because there's so many files and just so much going on with those two teams that I think it is helpful to kind of break those tasks down a little bit further for them to kind of look back at those timelines as they're going through the reporting season. And then for our process, we use the Agile Scrum process on our data warehouse team, and that's the team that has our ETL developers that actually creates the file. So the EDFacts coordinator creates the user stories for each of the file specs, and like I said, most of those files are the data is sourced from the data warehouse or our SLDS, and so the files are created by our ETL developers, but there are other files that are created by our program areas, especially most of that data is Title I data and Title III data. So in those cases, user stories are still created just for tracking by the EDFacts coordinator, but obviously then we'd be getting those files from those specific program areas. And then once we actually have the files created, we do obviously make sure that the program areas quality assure those files and actually approve them before we submit those files to ESS as well under the current process. And then once we do receive those coordinated data quality review sheets, the CDQR sheets from the feds, right now we are assigning each specific item to either a person or a team. And then depending on the topic, if there are many items that came up, we will create follow-up meetings and discuss with the program areas as needed there as well. So that's our current process. So next slide. So these are our kind of rough plans for modernization right now. So again, these are not final. These are just kind of initial ideas about how we might change our process going forward. So the thought is that we may send our files to EDPAS as soon as they are produced. So that'd be much earlier than we do currently, since right now we wait until we get that very final approval right now. So we would send our files to EDPAS as soon as they are produced, and probably under similar production dates as we do now, and knowing that we need extra time then for the internal program areas to both QA the file that we produce. We would still give them the CSV files that we submit to do their quality assurance on, and then also review the BSRI or the business rules that are created in EDPAS to give them a chance to review those in the tool itself, and then obviously provide data notes if needed as well, all in one step. And then the plan is that we would still continue to wait for that final program area approval before the final submission step. So that's our plans for now. Any questions?
Yvette, there was a question, and Joseph, I'm not sure if you were referencing, you asked a question whether it was to the department or was that at the point where she was talking about within state? If you're able to.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Sure. Joseph asked the question, what if we asked a question and the response made no sense? And I'm not sure if he meant if he asked a question of the U.S. Department of Ed or if it was within state. So I'm asking him to clarify.
Okay, yeah, I'm not too sure how to address that one.
I can respond to the Ed. That was a question for the department.
Okay.
Based on a previous question I asked. Oh, okay. You can try again and give us another chance. So if you clarify what question needs to be revisited, we'll come back to that. All right, you got another question here from Cameron Smith. Are uploaded files automatically submitted when the due date passes, or are they manually submitted? Okay, sorry, that's not for you. Okay. And we'll come back to those questions later, but just like with the North Carolina presentation, thank you so much, Yvette, for taking the time to come and share what your processes are. I really appreciate these descriptions and some really practical strategies that people can use. So thank you for that. And I'm guessing you're probably going to get some outreach after the meeting about how you make some of these things work. So
happy to help. Thanks for having me.
That'd be great. Okay.
I think I'm up.
Okay. Yep. Turn it over to Barb. Thanks, Barb.
Okay. So the last two presenters were talking about data governance and communication, and that's sort of where the second component of EDFacts modernization comes in, and that is more emphasis and more use and leveraging of the Common Education Data Standards, which is called CEDS or CEDS, depending on your preference. So next slide, please. So if you haven't heard about SEDS, SEDS is a bunch of different things, but it primarily is a vocabulary about data that is used in education. So if you're looking for what is a student, what is this, what is that, you look it up on SEDS and they'll have some definitions that are common definitions. The other thing that SEDS is it's a tool, and it allows a state to connect up their data sources with common data sources so they can see how they measure or how things work to the federal reporting, as well as other types of reporting. And the third thing that SEDS is, and this is going to be really important as we come into modernization, it's a community of stakeholders. It's a bunch of people that get together to talk through a particular data item, share how the different states are doing it, to identify some best practices, to come up with ways to solve problems that a lot of states are having. So again, SEDS is a vocabulary, it's tools, and it's a community of users. Next slide. So the part where SEDS is really important for the EDFacts modernization is these EDFacts working groups that are being led by Emily Rang. And the purpose of these EDFacts working groups is to work through an EDFacts file and convert that to SEDS. And as part of those discussions, they're talking about what types of data sources are needed to come up with the aggregate data that you submit for EDFacts. So they're going through the various file specs. They have a draft sort of template that all the file specs fit into, but it enables states to talk about a particular file spec. There's been some meetings recently about the NRD file specs, talking about what data sources are being used across different states, learning about best practices. How do you combine these pieces up together to get the aggregate data you need to submit to ED? Once this working group works, has their conversations and comes up with some agreed upon, here's some best practices, here's some data sources that make sense, they will be posted for everybody to use. Next slide. So you can be involved as at the very end and just use the information that these groups come into, but you can also be involved by participating in these working groups. And it's not just the EDFacts coordinators, it may be a particular person within the state who deals with NRD data or migrant data that wants to join the working group that's talking about those file specs. And what they do is they review the file spec, they review the drafts, connections that are already out there. They talk about the file specs, and they do throw questions back to the department where there's confusion about what it is the department's asking. And then all that information is collaborated and drafted into an updated connection. And that goes on until they get something that the working group feels is a useful connection, and then it'll be posted for everybody to use. So you can participate in using these either by just using the end products that they're going to be posting, or be part of making the sausage and joining in on these conversations. And again, we would encourage the different states to join in on the conversations, because the more states that are involved, the better we're going to be able to get to the best practices and unique ways or the appropriate ways to get to the aggregate data that you submit to EDFacts. Again, the big part that we're bringing in on SEDS, again, is it's about the data. The data matters. Next slide. You can do the next slide. Okay. Let's hold on that slide and we'll go on one more and we'll come back to that one, to doing the questions. So time is, of course, important to everybody. So I want to give you a few of the schedule points. So the first date that you have to be concerned about for school year 22-23, the upcoming school year, or the school year that we just started, is February 8th. That's the date when we do need to get file spec 206, which is the school support and improvement. That's where you mark the schools as having comprehensive school improvement, targeted school improvement, or additional targeted school improvement, known as CIS, TIS, and ATIS. It's also when you submit file spec 212, which is why the school got that particular status. Those two files will be submitted in our old system, ESS, and they need to be submitted by February 8th, 2023, so that they can be part of the CSPR, the Consolidated State Performance Report. The year following, those files will be in EDPass. And what we're going to do in ESS is we're going to roll over your current directory, because these two files only are submitted for schools that are in existence in the previous school year. And then you can submit your files for 206, indicating which schools are these statuses and indicating the reasons for those statuses. That all needs to be done by February 8th, and then that information becomes part of your Consolidated State Performance Report. Okay, the next date that's going to happen is around April, early April. We're going to open up EDPass, and you can begin to submit your directory, your grades offered, and your charter file specs. We are running a little bit later than what we had intended, and the due date for those will be moved out at least 6 weeks, so that you have plenty of time to finish up your directory, grades offered, and your charter file spec. Then come mid-June, we're going to open it up for all the remaining early files. That's membership, free and reduced price lunch, staff, CCD school, IDA, and all the IDA files. And again, you'll have a period of time to submit all of them. So those are the basic dates we're looking at right now. Okay, next slide. The other part that we need to talk about is metadata, and that is the SSS IDEA, where you indicate for your state which disability categories you use, when your child count date was, what educational environments are used in your state. And that information feeds into the business rules for File Spec 002, children with disabilities, school age, and File Spec 089, children with disabilities, early childhood. You're going to be entering that directly into EDPass so that the business rules can run. There will be a web page in there, and it'll be similar to the web page that you currently see in eMaps, where you just mark which disability categories you use and which educational environments you use. And before you can submit 002 and 089, the responses in that IDA page for the metadata have to align with the data. So you'll be able to, prior to the due date of File Spec 002 and 089, you're going to provide the metadata and you're going to provide the data, and you can adjust either one of them so that everything's in alignment when you submit the files themselves. Then during the summer of 2023, we're going to improve that survey functionality so that it can take more of the survey. Again, our intention is to take the stuff that's currently in our eMap system and the stuff that's in our ESS system and have them in one place that you go to. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly before we do our Q&As. So, Kelly?
Sure. Hi, thanks, Barb. Just a couple of things that you can expect from us in the next six months, and then we'll get back to questions here. We are going to continue doing these webinars on a periodic basis. So at least every 2 months, we're going to be touching base and letting you know what we have done, hopefully address the questions that you've had from the last session, or make sure that those are wrapped up before we meet again. We will have the focus groups with states to continue to gather some input that was mentioned earlier. User acceptance testing with a select group of states. We've got EDPass users, and I'm sorry, Barb, did you explain the login.gov reasons why we're using login.gov?
I did not, but I can do that.
Yep, that'd be great. Thanks.
So one of the reasons that David brought up earlier that we were modernizing our system, it was because of both the age of our system and for security reasons. And the federal government has required us to have multiple factor authentication. And the way that we're going to do that is through login.gov. So anybody in your SEA that needs access to EDPass will need to set up their own login.gov account. And that will be the authentication method that they will use to get into EDPass. And we're going to be working on some more information about that. But for right now, it would be important to start getting started on getting your login.gov accounts.
Are we going to send out specific information on how to do that? Or?
Yes, we're going to send out some specific guidance on that. I'm working with PSC to get that article out.
Okay, great. As you can see in that last bullet, we've got the EDFacts partner support update that we send out every 2 weeks. We are going to be including a section in there that is really more designed for our data governance support, where it's targeted more to your program office contacts within the state, so that you can easily share with them some key information about what's coming, whether it's, hey, don't forget to look at the due dates, they're listed at the end here, a particular data quality explanation of data notes or resources for the data notes. We don't have that planned out yet. We actually got that as a suggestion this week. I think that was from either Casey or Yvette, but to use the support update as a tool within your state. Okay, so I think that was the final. Was there one more slide there, Alec? The end. Okay. We'll go back and address some of these questions. Some of the questions we're not going to be able to answer verbally, or I would like to make sure that we have our information straight before we make a commitment. And there will be some things that are going to be happening in school year 22-23 that are simply the function of we've got to set the system up and we've got to get it up and running. So this is how we're going to be operating for this first year. So just wanted to clarify that some of the things that we are doing this year and the timing of when we are opening the system, we would love to give you more time, but right now we're limited simply as we are building it. We need to make sure it's working before we have people using it. But okay, so I'm going to just start at the bottom actually and work my way up because it's easier and those questions don't scroll well if we start at the top. Seth asked the question, will we be able to tag other users to provide comments or notes in EdPass, or will we need to do that outside of EdPass? And Barbara, David, can you respond to that one?
Yes, I can respond to that one. In the initial versions of EdPass, you will need to do that outside of EdPass. We do have on a list of future features that adding tagging. So when we bring up EdPass, it is going to be the basic functionality because we didn't want to overthink it as in terms of what SEAs need, because we're not SEAs and we don't know exactly what you need. So after the first year, after you go through the process, we will be opening up for getting recommendations and suggestions on different things, features that would be helpful to you. And then we're going to rank order them on features that are beneficial for the most amount of states are going to be the ones that we would do first. But yes, initially when it comes up, it will not be able to tag other users. There's a couple, Kelly, here about just the users in general. Do you want me to cover that real quick?
That'd be great, thanks.
Okay, so the way that the users are going to work is the SEA is going to control who has access to EdPass. From our point of view, we will enable 2 accounts for every state, and those people will be able to set up accounts for everybody else. So every state can have up to 2 people that sets up accounts for other people. Now, when setting up those accounts for other people, you'll assign them to roles, and those roles can have different functionality. So you could give one person just functionality to upload files. You can give another person the functionality to upload files and add data notes. And you could give a third person only the functionality to submit data. The other way that you can cross it, so you can cross it by functionality. People can upload data, they can add data notes. You can have people that just can look at stuff, but they can't do anything with it. The other functionality that you're going to be able to set is what data they can do things with. So you could have some users that can only look at migrant data, for example, or only look at IDA data. So you get to cut it in both directions, both by what they can do and what data they can do that for. And we're leaving that to the SEAs. We will be providing you with some templates that are kind of like starting places of roles that you might need, but all of those are just suggestions to get you started because we want to make this as flexible as possible because each state does handle things differently. Back to you, Kelly.
Okay, I'll just keep going up the chain here. June asked a question about, or made a comment about the directory moving and how that's going to have an impact on the state. There's nothing we can do about the timing of that right now. So now's a good time to be thinking about a workaround on that. If you would like to chat with Chen Su and just do some brainstorming about how you might approach that, then feel free to reach out. But that's kind of we can't make a change to that right now, just simply from the logistics of building it and getting up and running. And Barb, you got a question about login.gov, why they recommend using a personal email address.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to go investigate that one, Kelly, and I'll provide that back when PSC sends out the information on the login.gov. We'll have some additional information on how it works and why it's running the way it does.
All right, and stay around because I got a couple more here. But do we have to wait? This is a question from Fawn. Do we have to wait for the files for 22-23 to be opened up, or will we be able to submit earlier if the data is available sooner? Fawn, this goes to kind of the long-term view of the system. Long-term, we hope to be able to have the system open earlier so that you can submit earlier. It's still going to require a process simply because we don't have a Google budget. We don't have we've got to be able to do things with our 8 people in a strategic way where we are pacing out our work a little bit. Our contract system is set up right now to have, what is it, .0, .1, .2, .3, .4. I think we have a .4. So that's how we're going to be doing it for 22-23. We are, like Barb said earlier, David, we're going to do our best to open it as early as possible so you can get in there and start submitting. But it's in 22-23, it's going to be a little bit tight because it's probably going to be about 6 weeks between the time that it's enabled and the time that it's due, data are due. Barb, I got all that right?
Nailed it.
Okay. Link for the recording and the slide deck. PSC will put that in. It's going to be posted on Communities 360 site, correct? I believe that's correct. So PSC will provide that. It will also be announced in the Ed support updates, or the EDFacts support update, bi-weekly support update that goes out. If you are not on that list, I highly recommend getting on it. Reach out to PSC and note that you would like to get on the bi-weekly notice and take a look at that. Okay, will EdPass support different users, different authorizations? Okay, you already explained that one. And Joe, we'll go back to your question here. I think that one was about submission timeline and file release. I'll get up there, and I'll lose my place here. Are uploaded files automatically submitted when the due date passes, or are they manually submitted in EdPass? Barb or David?
They are manually submitted. And again, one of the important things is going to be to learn some new terminology. As David mentioned earlier, the phrase upload just means you've uploaded your data into the SEA side of EdPass. The department can't see it when it's over in that side. You work on it, you correct the data, you add the data notes, and only when you're finished and you're ready, you push the button and you submit it over to Ed. So it requires you to actually get into the system and push the button to submit the data. If by the due date you had something ready, but you didn't push the button, it won't be received by the department, and that file will have missed its due date. So it's going to be really important that you arrange your processes to remember to do that last step of pushing the button.
And PSC is going to be monitoring that too. So if something's not submitted, they'll be able to help out and reach out and say, hey, I think you need to hit your submit button. Okay, so we have a question here. This is Chandy. What do you want states to do if we don't know why a change has occurred? This is about the data results and what the data note should be. You don't want to postulate all that. I think it's really important to just make this statement that we do not expect the EDFacts coordinators to be the master of all information about everything in the data. And I think that's part of what we want to make sure that we change and communicate about the importance of data governance within the state. That there is someone in your state who knows why was there a shift in practice, or why was there data unexpected data change. And we have several examples of that in the CCD process during the pilot, where the response we got back was, checked it, the data are correct. And we're looking at it and we say, it can't be correct because it's an impossible scenario. So Chen Su got on the phone with the state and said, I'm going to show you this result, and I'm going to tell you why it's impossible. And having the people on the a larger group of people talking through what that problem was, they were able to identify what the problem was and fix the problem. I mean, it's kind of like the perfect model of shared responsibility for data. But EDFacts coordinators, and this is why, if you don't know who those program office contacts are, and I think Casey and Yvette both pointed out that the terminology that I use may not be the same terms that you use, but I'm talking about the people who are responsible for overseeing a grant program within a state should know I had an eligibility criteria that changed. I have a new assessment that's being used. I've got new staffing requirements. We've got, whatever the thing is, eligibility criteria was shifted. Whatever the thing is that might have had an impact on the data, somebody in the state knows that answer, and they might be able to answer that question very easily. And we want to make sure that those people are engaged in the process so that they can help out with this process. So this is kind of a long answer, but somebody in the state does know. Make sure you've got your data governance process in place. And this is very similar to Joe's question about the data note. When the SEA receives the grant from the U.S. Department of Ed, the SEA is also taking the responsibility for monitoring that grant implementation. There are specific measures, and I'll reference one that's in the IDEA program. When that grant goes forward, the state says, I have a general supervision and process in place that ensures I know what's going on in my state with the data. So if you have an LEA that is submitting data and it's poor quality, it's incomplete, there's something wrong with it, something's wrong with it, and you submit it anyway, that's the SEA's responsibility. It is not the responsibility, the SEA was responsible for knowing what they're submitting and why. So if you've got LEAs that are uncooperative or whatever the process might be, that's something that would be considered an internal controls process within the state. So it's not meeting the full requirements of the general supervision for that grant that has already been committed by the SEA. So that's, just say, internal controls is one of them. And Barb did a presentation quite a while ago, it's probably 8-10 years ago, about internal controls, and provided some examples of that. This is from her auditing days, but it was about how to ensure, or what kinds of strategies you can set up to ensure that you've got good data management using good internal controls. And I kind of feel like it'd be a good time to bring that session back to life, Barb, and kind of revisit what were those strategies that were talked about, and maybe some other states can talk about how they address this. Anyway, okay, we got the PowerPoint slides. Yes, they are going to be published as soon as possible. And we got to thank you about the DMS clarification on slide 28. The data notes question that this was from Seth. Will data notes carry over? I did want to clarify, David made a point about we are going to be able to carry data notes over, but the first year of the system, we don't have anything in there that we're going to be able to carry over. So you may have to answer questions in school year 22-23 that you won't have to answer again in 23-24. This also goes back to the nature of the data. Then it's important to remember that these grants are funded every year. So every single year, fresh slate, clean record, you've got to be able to answer the question again. So how we do that efficiently, like the charter definition, I think was one, charter name explanation, how we do that efficiently for you, and how we make sure that the program office is able to say, with this grant program, this grant award for in July 2023, how we ensure that the state is responding to that. The state is going to have to affirm it, whether or not there's a checkbox, whether there's something that says, yep, that note is still active. There may still need to be a process, and I'm not sure if we've already got that solution in place. Barb, if you we can talk about that in the written responses. I know we only have 5 minutes here, so we're almost up to Joe's question. So Yvette asked, will we be able to filter the EdPass detailed error list via the column headings in the table, similar to the functionality in DMS? Barb, are you or David able to answer that?
Yes, you will be able to filter things. One of the things that we are putting in EdPass is the download feature on the various pages. So if you see something on the page in a grid, you can hit a download button. It'll come, like David said, in a CSV file that you can easily import into Excel and use it there. and then you can filter to your heart's content. But on the page itself, you will have some filtering and sorting capability. We're
Okay,
coming
now back
to
to
the
the,
close here.
what's that?
Oh, you got about 4 minutes left. Give me a time
Yeah,
check.
now back to the question that Joe wanted us to revisit, and I think I've already answered it. Will we have the ability to submit data at any time, or we still need to wait for the release like in the past for ESS? And yes, we will still have a system release for file deployment. Is there anything to add to that? Barb?
That's particularly for the first year. We are, one of the reasons that we're modernizing is hopefully to not have that running quite as delayed as we have had it.
Okay, and then Carmen's question was also, no, we cannot just carry over all the data nodes at this point in time. If we're able to figure out a way to do that, we will certainly do that, but at this time, no. And I think Barb listed, or maybe it was Liz, listed in her session on the presentation, how many different places we currently have data nodes. We've got OMB Max, we've got CSPR, we've got IDEAs, SPP, APR, we have our data quality spreadsheets, we've got well, I mean, that's just a short version of them. We have data notes in so many different places right now that I don't think that we would be able to bring over all the comments that we've received from all the different sources. So it's just part of the function of where we're at today. Okay, can any user use the delete function or only certain user accounts? And I think Barb has answered that one, that people will have different user access. So not everybody will have delete function. We used to be able to submit SEA without deleting the file. Do we now have to delete and then resubmit, or can we resubmit and overwrite the data? That was from June. Barb?
Yes, that's actually an improvement that we are making to the system. So when you have a file and you're uploading it and you're intending for that new file to cover the entire thing that you previously had, there'll be a little button for the on the upload that you just mark and say, I want this to delete what was there and replace it with this new file. So it'll be a one-step process instead of a two-step process.
Okay, and I know we've got just 2 more minutes here. If the late correction reason is not accepted for whatever criteria you have to be developed, does that mean the SEA cannot make the correction? I wanted to clarify that in the new process, the state is providing a reason for why they could not have complete and accurate data at the due date. That reason can then be used by the grant making office in a grant award decision, whether or not they put the grant on high risk status, whether they say, thank you for the information, and what are your corrective actions that are designed for the future, whatever the thing is that the reason for the late data, is it systemic with this state, with this particular file? Well, that's probably going to be addressed as in some way in the grant award that goes to the state. So yes, you can still make a correction. I cannot imagine a time when there would be a rejection of the request to submit a correction. But the reason that we're doing this process is so we know any data products that are in process already, how big is the change, and do we need to pull back or suppress, or do we need to suppress the data that we've got for this particular state, for this particular file as we're moving forward, or is that data sufficient right now? Sorry, I lost my train of thought here. I'm trying to, I know we're out of time here, but I'll see if there's anything really quick that we can still respond to. Deleting submissions be a requirement in the new DQ process? Submissions. I'm not sure what the context was for that one, so we might have to come back and revisit that. June is suggesting we double check that our process slide is correct. We'll do that before we post the Q&As. We had some, I think now we're up to the point where David, part C, Robin, thank you for asking the question. Barb, do you want to address the EMAPs for part C question that we've got there from Robin at 131?
Yeah, so for the first year, 22-23, the stuff that was approved under the EDFacts collection, which is your ESS files and some of your EMAP surveys, will be in EdPass. The stuff that's cleared under a different approval, OMB approval, like the Part Cs, will be handled differently in a future year. We'll eventually move it probably into EdPass, but for 22-23, your Part Cs will still be part of EMAPs. Since we're at 301, I think maybe we ought to when we're closing out, we want to remind you guys of how well all the states did on the CCD pilot, which is our pre-submission. So you proved that it was doable. More than you proved it was doable, you really knocked it out of the park and hit a home run, whatever analogy you want to use there. You did an excellent job. And all of us here at ED have complete confidence in the SEA's ability to submit this data. The piece that we would encourage you to, and the reason I think we brought the two, we had those two presentations, is that in your state, this is a team sport. The EDFacts coordinator alone is not going to be able to modernize your submissions. The EDFacts coordinator, along with all their business owners, data people, whatever you want to call them, you guys can make this a success. So I'll turn it back over to you, Kelly.
Yeah, and I'm going to address one more question, is how we used to know if the data notes are acceptable. Go back to Liz's presentation where she laid out, here are the kinds of, here's the type of information to include to ensure that your data note is acceptable. So we'll provide more training, more Q&As about that, but there's the answers I think are going to be kind of blatantly obvious. Thank you so much to all the presenters, both on our side as well as to Yvette and to Casey. We really appreciate that. Thank you to everybody who raised a question. If I didn't get to your question, I am very sorry. And I see that we've got a few more that are coming in. So we will continue to answer questions. We'll continue to be as responsive as we can. We're excited about this opening and looking forward to seeing you again at the next session. I don't think we have a date yet, but we'll send that out in the PSC support update. Okay, thank you very much and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.